Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we take a look at this. So this is a very interesting sword, I think, and I hope you'll enjoy it. But it's also a sword that has a lot of questions for me. So I hope I can give you some interesting information, but I also hope that the community will be able to fill in a few gaps that I currently am not able to fill myself. So the first thing I want to mention about it is that this is the typical French style an 9 or an 11 hilt. So in a previous video I showed you a an 11/9 without where the bars had been removed. So it basically had just the knuckle guard left and the regular grip and hilt. So this is what it would have looked like in its intact form. However, the catch here is that this is not actually a French hilt. We'll talk about that as we see the sword in more detail. I just want to give you a little bit of context now as to where I found it, a bit more historical information perhaps. So this was part of a big, about 10 swords I bought in one lot at an auction. And most of them were in really bad shape. Some of them, well, it included, for example, the really damaged, the power tool damaged briquette I showed in my first video actually. It included a few, I think it included some of the 1882s that I've shown. So a bunch of interesting swords, but really in rather rough shape, generally speaking. And this was perhaps the exception. It was stuck into a scabbard, which is not its own. And it was a more recent scabbard. And I had some trouble taking it out, to the point that when I got the swords home and I went to take this out of its scabbard, it seemed stuck. So I was really disappointed because I was afraid it was one of those situations in which the sword might be rusted inside the scabbard. Luckily that was not the case, and with just a little bit of extra strength, not too much, I was able to remove it. And this popped out, actually beautifully intact, more or less. We'll see here the tip has a little bit of damage, but minor. So a beautifully intact blade on this slightly weird hilt, because it's covered in, I'm not sure if it's gold paint, and if it's gold paint, if it's recent or not, or if it's some kind of badly done gilding. So I'm not sure about that. Anyway, I immediately thought, okay, a French an 11, how cool. And then the more I looked at it, the more it didn't seem to match. It was lacking the typical French proof marks or inscriptions or maker's marks. But what really kind of set me off the French path of train of thought, let's say, was that I saw an inscription on both sides. We'll see it in detail in just a moment. And there's an F with a Roman numeral 2, so under a crown. And after a bit of research, what I found out is that this refers to Franz II, or Francis II, who was the last Holy Roman Emperor until 1806, when he became Franz I of Austria, of the Austrian Empire. So this was very interesting because it actually dates this sword very precisely, and it falls within 1800, when this kind of hilt came to be as the French model an 9, and 1806, when Franz changed his name, so ended his stint as the Holy Roman Emperor and became Emperor of Austria. So it's very interesting because this sword falls within a handful of years in terms, at least, of the blade production. It also has a maker's mark that I could not make out for the life of me, but now that I know what it is, and I'll show you in detail in just a second, and it confirms its Austrian provenance. The big mystery here, though, is the hilt. And this is where I'm hopefully going to find help from the community and but anyway, enough talking. Let's see it. I'll let you know. I'll talk about all the details while we look at the sword. Okay, let's take a closer look. So, as I mentioned, it has, let's take a look at the hilt first. It has this 18/1802 style hilt, so an 9 or an 11. This is how it would have looked, except that the French version of this hilt was always made of brass. As far as I know, I've never heard of a steel one, whereas this one is not brass, it's steel, or iron perhaps, but it's not brass for sure. I know that obviously this, as you probably well know, in these times, sword models were often adopted by different armies, and there was also a certain degree of customization and freedom for officers in how they armed themselves. So, who knows? I wouldn't be too surprised if this was a custom job. Anyway, what we see here is this gold residue. And I'm not an expert, so I can't really tell. I can't tell if this is, it seems to me more like this is a layer of paint rather than gilding. But any of you may be able to tell me more about it. What makes me think it's paint is also the fact that you can probably see it dripped onto the ricasso area here. So it's not it's kind of a shoddy job they did if they were gilding. So what we see here are these lovely oval-shaped langets. Normally the AN 9 or AN 11 lots of times has like a button on the two sides here, like a metal button. This one doesn't, which again lends to the idea that this may not be an original French version, but perhaps maybe some Austrian soldier liked the style. The grip is now slightly damaged, but it was covered in leather. And you can actually see here, which is really interesting, the threads that kind of gave structure underneath the leather to the grip. But then you can also see this copper wire that binds the grip. So I'm not sure. It all looks original, like the leather is worn and old. The copper, though, looks really in good condition. So who knows? Now, moving to the blade. This kind of sword is very interesting because it has, as I mentioned, if it dates to the early 1800s, so between 1802 perhaps, or 1800 and 1806, this may have seen action in some of the most dramatic times in French and European history, albeit on the other side of the battlefield from the French. Now, this is where we can see the inscriptions. You can see a royal cipher, there's a crown, and underneath the crown is a F with Roman numeral 2. So as I mentioned, this stands for Franz II, and in his time as the Holy Roman Emperor, the last Holy Roman Emperor. Here again, the crown. And yeah, this was a very, very beautiful surprise because, as I mentioned, the sword was stuck in its scabbard, who knows for how long. So I was very, very happy when I saw this. There's one more marking which confirms that it's an Austrian blade. And initially I couldn't make it out. Once you know what it is, you can definitely read it. It's Fischer. So in the same style as the French, who would have put their Klingenthal here on the spine, this Austrian maker put their name, Fischer. They're a rather famous Austrian sword maker from the time. So this confirms the German/Austrian production of this blade. Now, let's look at the blade in general, though. Let's look at it a bit more closely. It has no step on the ricasso here, let's say, at the bottom of the blade. The fuller starts, you can't see it. It doesn't exactly start at the ricasso, but 1 centimeter in, let's say. And it's a rather shallow fuller. You can see it, you know it's there, but it's not in your face kind of decorative fuller, let's say. It's very subtle. And then we move up the blade with a very elegant curve. Some slight staining, but very minor considering the age and the general condition it's in. And then we end at the tip here, where literally the last millimeter or two have either been kind of smashed or broken off. I'm not sure. I can't really tell. It seems Yeah, something broke off, about 1 or 2 millimeters of the tip, but it's really minor, and it's, yeah, I would say probably the tip continued up to here, perhaps. But overall, as you can see, I think it's in very beautiful conditions, and I think it's a really, really interesting sword with potentially, as I mentioned, a lot of deep connections to some very important European historical events. And that was it. This is perhaps one of my favorite swords in my collection. It feels really nice to hold. I can imagine wielding this in the battlefield must have felt very empowering. And yeah, it's a sword that I really want to learn more about. I hope to be able to actually definitively determine whether this hilt was its original hilt or if it was not, and where the hilt came from anyway. So if you can help me with that, I would be very grateful. If not, that's also fine. I'm happy to watch these videos and enjoy them. And yeah, please like and subscribe if you feel inclined to do that, because it really helps the channel. And I'll see you soon. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.